Welcome. Come in and make yourself comfortable. Tonight, I invite you to leave the worries of the day behind, to settle in, to rest, and to join me for a quiet journey through time. We'll travel together, gently and unhurried, into the life of the Queen, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, England's beloved daughter. It's soft, no rush, no noise, no plan. Only the peaceful rhythm of history, told slowly, as if by the glow of candlelight on a quiet night. We will walk through grand palaces and quiet gardens. We will hear the soft footsteps of a princess, and later, a queen, moving through the great halls of England. We will listen to the gentle turning of pages, the soft scratch of a quill, the distant toll of church bells at dawn. So breathe deeply, let your eyes grow heavy. You are safe here, and together we will drift through a world long past, a world of castles, velvet gowns, golden crowns. A world where Elizabeth's story slowly unfolds like a dream. It was early morning on the 7th day of September, the year 1533. The sun rose slowly over the River Thames, casting a pale golden light across the roofs of Greenwich Palace. A thin mist curled along the water, soft and silver, wrapping the palace in quiet. The world seemed to hold its breath. Inside the palace walls, the day had begun long before the sun's first light touched the towers. The Queen's chamber was hushed, heavy with the smell of wood smoke, herbs, and candle wax. Thick tapestries softened the stone walls, and rushes covered the floor, their faint scent mixing with the damp air of morning. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, lay still among fine linen sheets. The young queen, so often described as lively and bright, was pale now, her dark hair damp upon her brow. Around her, women moved softly, her ladies in waiting. Her midwife, a physician standing near, his hands folded quietly before him. No one spoke above a whisper. Outside the chamber, pages and servants waited, listening for news. Beyond them, the palace slowly stirred. In the kitchens, fires crackled to life, the soft clatter of pots, the warm scent of bread rising in the ovens. The low voices of cooks as they prepared a small feast. Then, at last, from behind the great door of the Queen's chamber came a sound that broke the hush. A baby's cry. Thin and small at first, like the mewl of a kitten, then stronger, clearer, carrying through the silent corridors. A voice new to the world, but destined to be remembered across the centuries. Princess had been born. The midwife wrapped the child carefully in soft linen, edged with gold thread, and carried her to the Queen's side. Tiny fingers curled like rosebuds. A crown of fine, pale red hair, like a flame in the soft light of dawn, framed her small face. Anne Boleyn gazed at her daughter, and in that quiet moment, pride and wonder shone in her tired eyes. Outside, the bells of the palace chapel began to toll. The sound rolled out across the river, over fields damp with morning dew, and reached the ears of those waiting beyond the palace gates. The news spread. The Queen had given birth to a healthy child, a daughter, a princess named Elizabeth. In the great hall, banners were hung. The gold and white of the Queen's falcon emblem, the red and white of the Tudor rose. Tables were laid with trenchers of bread, goblets of wine, and small dishes of spiced fruits and sweetmeats. But the celebration was quiet, respectful, but not as joyful as it might have been had the child been a boy. For King Henry VIII had hoped for a son. Far from the palace, the king himself rode through the misty fields of Kent, returning from hunting. When a messenger reached him with the news, he smiled. He spoke kind words, promising that sons would surely follow. But perhaps, in the soft shadow of his heart, there was a flicker of disappointment, hidden beneath the proud words of a father greeting his newborn child. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees of the palace park, the Princess Elizabeth lay in her cradle. It was carved of oak, strong and dark, its sides polished smooth as glass. Soft cushions of crimson silk lined it, and above it hung a small banner, broidered with the Queen's falcon, its wings outstretched as if in flight. The baby slept, her breath slow and even, the faintest smile touching her lips as if already dreaming of the world beyond the walls of her chamber.
Wow.
The palace grew still. Candles flickered low, their flames bending in the soft breeze that slipped through the open window. The river whispered beyond the stone walls, its voice carrying secrets of kings and queens, of futures yet to come. And in that quiet hour, no one could have guessed that this small, fragile princess, born without the fanfare of a prince, would one day rule England with a strength and wisdom that would outshine them all. The lute fades. The palace sleeps. The river flows on. The lute plays softly, as if echoing through a long, empty corridor. The voice returns, slow, warm, and steady. Elizabeth's early days were filled with quiet beauty, though perhaps touched by shadows that she could not yet see. The great halls of Greenwich Palace, where she first opened her eyes to the world, were places of wonder for a small child. The tall windows let in soft shafts of light that danced on polished floors. Tapestries hung on the walls, heavy with stories woven in threads of gold and crimson, stories of knights and saints, of kings long past. The little princess spent her earliest days in rooms that smelled of roses and beeswax, where the air was always filled with the gentle hum of voices speaking in soft tones, of the faint clink of silver goblets, of the distant sound of the Thames rolling by. Her cradle stood near a great fireplace, where flames flickered and glowed through the long evenings. Nurses and ladies moved around her quietly, tending to her needs with gentle hands. They sang to her in voices as soft as the wind through the palace gardens, lullabies that spoke of peace, of safety, of England's green fields stretching far beyond the palace walls. Yet beyond these gentle scenes, the world was changing. For Queen Anne Boleyn's star, which had risen so high, began to fade. At first, Elizabeth's world was one of celebration. Her mother's ladies spoke proudly of her. Her father visited, gazing down at his daughter with what seemed, to a child's eyes, to be warmth. But in time, fewer footsteps echoed down the long halls to the nursery. Fewer voices spoke her mother's name with joy. The air in the palace seemed colder, as if the great stone walls themselves knew of coming sorrow. When Elizabeth was not yet 3, the shadows grew deeper. One day the princess was lifted from her cradle early, wrapped in a warm cloak, and carried swiftly through quiet corridors. The queen's apartments were dark, tapestries hung still, untouched by any breeze. The scent of her mother's favorite rose oil lingered faintly in the air, but the queen was gone. Anne Boleyn, bright, clever, ambitious, had fallen from favor, and the princess would see her no more. Elizabeth was too small to understand the whispers that now filled the palace, of treason, of trials, of a mother lost to the will of a king. She was taken from Greenwich, her small hands clutching the edge of her nurse's cloak, as they left behind the rooms that had been her world. The river carried her quietly away, its surface smooth as glass beneath the pale sky. The princess was brought to Hatfield House, a place of calm and green gardens, where she could be kept safe, far from the storms of court. Her new world was gentler in some ways. The great oaks around Hatfield stood silent and strong, their branches casting soft shadows on the grass. The gardens were filled with herbs and flowers, and bees hummed lazily in the sun. Elizabeth would walk hand in hand with her governess, Cat Ashley, a kind woman who spoke softly and taught her gently. Cat told her stories of wise queens and good kings, of saints and scholars, of the glories of England's past. Together, they read from books with pages that smelled of leather and ink, their words written in slow, careful script. Yet even in this quiet place, Elizabeth felt the absence of her mother, though she was too small to name what it was she felt. There was no gentle voice of a queen to sing her to sleep, no warm hand to smooth her hair, only the soft, steady presence of her governess, of her nurses, of her books and lessons. The seasons turned slowly at Hatfield. Spring brought soft rains that tapped against the diamond-shaped panes of her chamber window. Summer filled the air with the scent of roses and new-cut hay. Autumn painted the trees in gold and crimson, and the fallen leaves rustled beneath her small feet as she walked the garden paths. Winter came with frost on the grass and a hush over the land, as if the world itself had paused to rest. And through it all, Elizabeth grew. Quiet, watchful, thoughtful. A small princess, living in the gentle shadow of a mother's lost crown. In the evenings, as the sun sank behind the woods beyond the house, Elizabeth would sit by the fire, her face lit softly by the glow of the flames. Cat would read to her or tell her of great women of old, of how patience and learning could be a princess's strength. Outside, The night fell quietly. The stars appeared, one by one, in the deep velvet of the sky. And in the silence of her chamber, Elizabeth's dreams were filled with the soft sounds of the river, the wind in the trees, the voices of the past. The lute fades. The fire glows low. The princess sleeps beneath warm covers, the world beyond her window wrapped in peace. Elizabeth's days at Hatfield passed with a gentle rhythm. Each morning the sun rose slowly over the green fields and quiet woods that surrounded the house. The dew sparkled on the grass. The birds sang softly from the hedgerows. And in the stillness of those early hours, the small princess would open her eyes to a world that seemed at peace. Her rooms at Hatfield were quiet, filled with the soft light that filtered through tall, narrow windows. The stone walls were thick, keeping out the chill of the wind. Tapestry of hunting scenes covered one wall, its colors faded by time, its figures forever frozen in chase. Elizabeth's bed was high, with curtains of pale linen that could be drawn close at night. Beneath its heavy covers, she would listen to the soft crackle of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl, the sigh of the wind in the chimney. Her days were filled with study, though at first the lessons were light, gentle teachings fit for a child. Caught Ashley, her governess, sat with her in a chamber lined with books. The room smelled of leather, of ink, of the faint sweetness of wood smoke. Elizabeth learned her letters from pages written in careful script. She traced them with small fingers, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kat spoke softly, praising her when she did well, guiding her gently when she stumbled. There was music, too. Elizabeth listened as her tutor played soft notes on a lute, showing her how to place her fingers, how to coax gentle sounds from the strings. The notes filled the room like sunlight, warm and kind. The gardens of Hatfield became her refuge. In spring, she walked among flowering herbs, their scents rising in the soft air. Lavender, rosemary, thyme. Bees drifted lazily from bloom to bloom. The grass was cool beneath her slippers. In summer, she sat beneath the great oak trees, a book upon her knee, listening to the soft hum of the world around her. The chirp of birds, the whisper of the breeze through the leaves. Autumn brought gold and scarlet to the woods. The ground was carpeted with fallen leaves, crisp and rustling beneath her feet as she wandered the paths, thinking her quiet thoughts. In winter, when the world lay under frost, Elizabeth watched the gardens from her window. The branches of the trees were etched in silver. The air beyond the glass was still, holding its breath beneath a sky the color of pale pearl. Yet though the world around her was full of beauty, Elizabeth's heart sometimes felt the weight of loneliness. She was a princess, yes, but no longer the center of courtly joy. No mother came to walk with her in the gardens, to sit beside her at the fire, to press a kiss upon her brow at night. Her father, the mighty King Henry VIII, was distant. His face grew familiar only through the images painted in great halls. The stern gaze, the broad shoulders, the hand resting upon a sword. And though new queens came and went, they did not fill the quiet space where a mother's love should have been. Jane Seymour, kind and gentle, had passed away before Elizabeth was old enough to remember her. Anne of Cleves came and went like a soft breeze. Catherine Howard, young and sweet, fell from favor in a story that echoed the loss of Elizabeth's own mother. Catherine Parr brought learning and kindness, and for a time Elizabeth's world seemed warmer. But even that brightness would not last. And so Elizabeth learned to find comfort in books, in study, in the quiet companionship of her faithful governess and tutors. The great stories of the past became her friends. The words of poets, the wisdom of philosophers, the histories of kings and queens. She learned to read not only in English, but in Latin and French, her small voice repeating phrases softly like prayers as she practiced by candlelight. Her mind, like the gardens around her, grew rich and full, tended carefully, watched over by those who loved her in their quiet way. In the evenings, as the world darkened outside, Elizabeth would sit by the window watching the last light fade from the sky. The stars appeared, one by one, their gentle light reflected in her thoughtful eyes. Kat Ashley would join her, wrapping a warm shawl around the young princess's shoulders. And together, they would speak softly of the day, of the lessons learned, of the beauty of the world beyond the palace walls. And when night fully fell, Elizabeth would climb into her great bed, drawing the curtains close. The fire would glow low. The air would fill with the soft ticking of the great clock in the hall, and in the quiet of her chamber, Elizabeth's dreams would carry her beyond the walls of Hatfield, beyond the lonely rooms of a princess forgotten, to a world she could not yet see. A world where one day she would reign as queen, the harp and lute fade, the night deepens. The princess sleeps in peace. The days of Elizabeth's childhood passed quietly, marked by the slow turning of the seasons and the steady growth of her mind. By the time she was a little older, her lessons became the heart of her world. Hatfield House, with its tall windows and stone walls, became not just a home but a school, a place where a princess learned to shape her thoughts, to master her words, to sharpen her understanding of the world. The mornings began early. The soft chime of a small bell would call Elizabeth from her sleep. As pale sunlight crept across her chamber floor, she would rise, wash in cool water from a silver basin, and dress simply. Her gown plain, but fine. Her hair brushed smooth, her face fresh as the morning. Her teachers were men of wisdom, chosen carefully. Roger Ascham, one of the greatest scholars of the time, came to guide her learning. He spoke gently, with kindness and patience. Elizabeth listened closely, her bright eyes watching his lips as he spoke of languages, of poetry, of history. Together, they read from books whose pages smelled of leather and old ink. Latin first, the words flowing like a quiet river as she repeated them softly after him. Then Greek, French, Italian, each language a new world for her to explore. Elizabeth loved these lessons. She delighted in the challenge of mastering difficult texts, of puzzling out meanings, of speaking with the grace of a learned woman. And when her mind grew tired, Ascham would pause and smile, and they would turn to gentler subjects. The poems of the ancients, the soft beauty of a well-formed verse, the quiet strength of wise words written long ago. There was music, too. Elizabeth's slender fingers learned to move across the keys of a virginal, to pluck at the strings of a lute, to draw soft, sweet notes from the instrument's heart. She learned to sing, her voice light and pure, rising softly in the quiet halls of Hatfield. The music filled her days with beauty, as much a part of her education as any book or lesson. In the afternoons, when the sun was warm upon the gardens, Elizabeth would walk among the flowers, reciting her lessons beneath her breath, or speaking softly with her governess or tutor. The bees hummed around her. The breeze stirred the leaves gently. The soft sound of the fountain played beneath their words. She learned more than books could teach in these moments. The art of careful listening, the grace of measured speech, the power of silence when wisely kept. Elizabeth's education was not all words and music. She learned to ride, her small figure poised and straight upon a gentle horse. She learned to dance, her feet moving lightly upon the polished floors of the great hall, the soft swish of her gown, keeping time with the music. She learned to sew fine stitches, to embroider delicate patterns upon silk, to craft small gifts with her own hands, a skill that taught patience, care, and pride in quiet work. Her mind grew sharper with each passing year, and yet, through it all, Elizabeth remained thoughtful and watchful. She understood, even as a girl, that knowledge was her refuge, a fortress stronger than any palace wall. It kept her safe in a world where fortunes rose and fell like the tides. It gave her strength, in a life where shadows often lingered at the edges of bright days. In the evenings, Elizabeth would sit by the fire, a book upon her lap, the soft glow of candlelight dancing upon the page. Cat Ashley would be near, perhaps sewing, perhaps reading too. The house would grow quiet as night fell beyond the windows. The stars would shine above the woods, and the soft hoot of an owl would mark the hour. And in those peaceful moments, Elizabeth would dream of distant lands, ancient queens, of a future that, for now, was hidden from her sight. A future she was slowly, quietly preparing to meet. As Elizabeth grew into her teenage years, the quiet world of Hatfield began to change. No longer was she only the studious princess among books and gardens. The time had come for her to step, softly and carefully, into the world of court. And court, with all its beauty, its music, its shining halls, was a place of hidden dangers. Elizabeth was brought, at times, to her father's palaces. She walked through great chambers where banners of crimson and gold hung from the high beams. The floors shone beneath her feet, polished like mirrors. The air was filled with the hum of voices, the soft music of lutes and flutes, the gentle clink of goblets raised in toast. Everywhere there were eyes, watching, weighing, measuring. Elizabeth had learned in her quiet childhood how to listen more than she spoke, how to watch more than she acted. Now, these skills kept her safe as she moved among courtiers who whispered behind fans, who smiled with lips that did not match the thoughts behind their eyes. She saw her father, King Henry VIII, from a distance most often, seated upon his great chair, dressed in furs and jewels, his face stern beneath his crown. At times his gaze would fall upon his daughter, and he would beckon her near. She would kneel gracefully, her small hand placed gently upon his, and speak the words of loyalty and love she had been taught. And though he smiled, though he spoke kind words, Elizabeth understood that the favor of a king could change as swiftly as the wind across the Thames. Her younger brother Edward was the hope of the realm, the son for whom her father had longed. Elizabeth greeted him with affection, playing her part as the dutiful sister. But even in these moments, she knew that the world now looked upon her as something less, a girl in a kingdom that prized its sons. And so, she learned to walk with care, to let no word slip that might bring danger, to let no glance linger that might be misunderstood. When Henry VIII died, the court changed once more. Elizabeth's brother, still a boy, became king. A new council ruled in his name. The air at court seemed full of soft warnings, unspoken rules, unspoken threats. Elizabeth returned to her studies, her books once again her refuge, her music her comfort. But she was no longer a child. She understood now how easily a wrong word, a wrong friend, a wrong step could bring ruin. In those days, her stepmother, Catherine Parr, widowed by the king's death, became a source of kindness. Catherine married again, a man named Thomas Seymour, the brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour. Thomas was handsome, charming, and bold. He came into Elizabeth's life like a warm breeze, full of attention, of praise, of small gifts, kind words. But beneath his charm, there was danger. Elizabeth, though young, saw it. She answered his words with polite silence, returned his gifts with thanks, and kept her heart guarded. And when whispers began of his boldness, of his plans, of his ambitions, Elizabeth stepped carefully, as she always had. One morning, the world changed again. Thomas Seymour was arrested. His plots, his secrets had come to light. And Elizabeth, though innocent, was questioned. Soft voices asked her hard questions. Gentle words pressed for answers. But Elizabeth's answers were wise, cautious, thoughtful. She spoke only the truth, only what was safe, only what was needed. And when the storm passed, she remained. Unharmed, though perhaps a little sadder, a little wiser. The court was a place of beauty, but also of shadows. And in these years, Elizabeth learned to walk in both, to see both the shining faces and the hidden dangers. She learned that a princess must always be watchful, always careful, always ready. Her mind, sharpened by study, now became a shield. Her silence, so often kept in childhood, now became a strength. At night, when she returned to her quiet chamber, Elizabeth would sit by the window and look out upon the dark gardens of the palace. The stars above seemed steady, unchanging, in a world that shifted and turned with every breath. The soft breeze stirred the curtains. The faint music of the court drifted up from below. And Elizabeth, seated in the pale light of the moon, dreamed not of jewels or gowns or feasts, but of safety, of wisdom, of the day when she might at last shape her own fate. The court had grown cold for Elizabeth. The bright halls, the soft music, the glitter of jewels, all seemed now to mask dangers that moved in silence, like shadows at dusk. And in time, the shadows reached for her. Her brother Edward's short reign came to an end, and with it, peace fled the land. The kingdom trembled, divided by faith and loyalty. Elizabeth's sister Mary took the crown. Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the woman whom Henry VIII had set aside to marry Anne Boleyn. Mary was queen, and Elizabeth's daughter of the woman Mary's mother had hated, found herself in peril. At first, Mary's words were kind. Elizabeth came to court dressed simply but with grace. She curtsied before her sister, spoke with care, and offered loyalty. But whispers filled the air. Whispers that Elizabeth was the hope of those who would see Mary's reign ended. Whispers that plots were made in her name, though she knew nothing of them. And so, one cold morning, Elizabeth's world changed. A knock upon her chamber door, soft footsteps. The voice of a messenger, respectful but firm. She was to come with them, to the Tower of London. Elizabeth rowed in a small barge along the Thames, the river dark beneath the pale sky. The oars dipped and rose, their soft rhythm like a sad song. The palace walls faded behind her. The great dark bulk of the tower rose ahead. The same tower where her mother had once walked, where her mother had once prayed, where her mother had met her end. Inside, the tower was cold and still. Elizabeth was given a small chamber, stone walls, a narrow window through which the gray light of day fell softly upon the floor. The air smelled of damp stone, of old wood, of time itself. She sat upon a plain stool, her hands folded quietly in her lap, and she waited. Waited for the questions. Waited for the judgment. Waited for what would come. Each day was much the same. The guards brought her small meals. Bread, a little cheese, a jug of water. Sometimes a priest came to speak with her. His voice was soft, his words meant to comfort. Sometimes a messenger came, bringing questions from the council, asking what she knew of plots and rebels. Elizabeth answered with the truth. Calm, steady, thoughtful, she spoke no word that could bring her harm. At night, she sat by the small window, looking out upon the dark courtyard below. The stars above seemed very far away. The wind carried the sound of water lapping against the tower walls. The soft hoot of an owl, the cry of a gull, the sigh of the river. These were her companions, and still she waited. Days turned to weeks. The shadows of the tower lengthened. And at last, word came. Elizabeth was to leave the tower. The danger had passed, or at least, the storm had calmed for a time. As she left the tower's gates, she looked up at its high walls, at the narrow windows, at the ancient stones that had watched over so many lives, so many fates. And she stepped softly into the light of day, older, wiser, and more watchful than ever. The court would see her again, the dangers would return. But Elizabeth had learned that even in the darkest place, the strength of a quiet heart could keep her safe. Her silence had been her shield, her patience, her sword, and as she rode away along the Thames, the river seemed to sing softly beneath the sky, carrying her back toward a future that still waited, hidden just beyond the horizon. Elizabeth was free from the tower, but her days of peace were not yet come. The court of Queen Mary was a place of careful steps, of words weighed before they were spoken. Elizabeth returned to her quiet life, not in the tower's stone embrace, but still watched, still measured. She lived at court when called and in the country when allowed, always under the gaze of those who wondered. Would she be loyal? She'd wait quietly for whatever fate her sister's reign would bring. Mary's rule was filled with storms, storms of faith, as the Queen sought to return England to the old religion, storms of politics, as her marriage to Prince Philip of Spain brought hope to some and fear to others, storms of the heart, as the Queen longed for a child and suffered when no heir came. And in the midst of all this, Elizabeth waited. Her days were filled with study still, books and letters, music and prayer. She walked the gardens of whatever house she called home at the time, her eyes lowered, her thoughts guarded. She spoke with care, she moved with grace, and all the while the world around her watched and wondered. The people loved Elizabeth. In the towns and villages, folks spoke of her beauty, her learning, her kindness. They saw in her the hope of a gentler future. But Elizabeth gave them no promise, no word to turn the Queen's eyes upon her in anger. She waited. At times Mary sent for her. Elizabeth would come to court dressed with quiet dignity. She would kneel before her sister, offer the words of loyalty, speak with gentleness, with care. And the Queen, torn between love and fear, between sisterhood and suspicion, would let her stay. For a time, as the years passed, Elizabeth grew in wisdom. She saw how swiftly fortunes could change at court. She learned how silence could be more powerful than speech, how patience could be stronger than force. She saw the hearts of men laid bare by ambition and fear, and she kept her own heart hidden, and so the seasons turned. The court changed, as all courts do, and Mary's health began to fail. The bright banners of her reign faded. The songs of joy that had marked her coming to the throne grew quiet, and the eyes of the kingdom turned more and more toward Elizabeth. The princess who waited, who watched, who held her peace. In the gardens, Elizabeth would walk beneath the changing skies. The pale blue of spring, the gold of summer, the silver gray of autumn, the soft pearl of winter clouds. She would listen to the wind in the trees, to the soft murmur of water in the fountains, and she would wonder, perhaps, what her future would bring. But she spoke of it to no one. Then, at last, the day came. A messenger rode to find her, breathless, weary from the journey. He knelt before her and spoke the words she had waited so long to hear. Mary was gone. Elizabeth was queen. The princess who had been forgotten, watched, doubted, had come at last into her own. The daughter of Anne Boleyn, born beneath the shadow of hope and danger alike, would now wear the crown of England. As Elizabeth stood upon the threshold of this new chapter, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sky above her was pale with dawn. The air was cool and still, and the river, as always, flowed softly on, carrying with it the old secrets, the old sorrows, and the promise of new beginnings. The news spread like a soft wind through the land. Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, was now Queen of England. From villages where thatched roofs smoked gently in the morning air, to great halls where banners of faded glory stirred in the breeze, the people lifted their heads with hope. They spoke her name, softly at first, then with joy. Elizabeth, a new dawn. The Queen herself, as always, met the moment with grace and thoughtfulness. She did not rush to seize the crown, though it was hers by right. Instead, she moved carefully, as she always had, respectful of custom, mindful of every eye upon her, every ear listening. The day of her coronation was cold, but bright. The sky above London was pale and clear, as if the heavens themselves watched with quiet wonder. Elizabeth rode through the city, dressed in robes of white and gold, her hair loose upon her shoulders like a river of pale flame. The people lined the streets, men, women, children, their breath clouding in the cold air, their voices rising in soft cheers. They tossed flowers before her horse, roses, lilies, violets, and the petals lay upon the ground like a carpet of welcome. Elizabeth smiled, a true warm smile that touched not only her lips, but her eyes. She lifted her hand in greeting, in thanks, and quiet promise. The streets were hung with banners, red and gold, white and green. At each corner, small choirs sang gentle hymns. Actors performed short plays to honor her. Children, dressed as angels, scattered herbs and petals before her path. The city's bells rang out, not loud, but steady, a soft music that filled the air like the voice of hope. At Westminster, the ancient church stood waiting, its stones dark with age, its windows glowing with the light of the morning sun. Elizabeth entered slowly, her steps measured, her heart steady. The great church was filled with the scent of candles, of incense, of old wood polished smooth by generations. The voices of the choir rose, gentle and sweet, filling the high vaulted space. She knelt at the altar, her head bowed low. The archbishop, his hands trembling slightly with the weight of history, placed the crown upon her brow. A circle of gold, heavy with jewels, yet light upon the head of one who bore it with honor. The crown seemed almost to glow in the soft light that filtered through the tall windows. The people watching, nobles, courtiers, servants, held their breath as if the world itself had stilled to mark this moment. When Elizabeth rose, she was not only a daughter, a sister, a princess, she was queen, the ruler of England, the keeper of its hopes. The ceremony ended and Elizabeth left the church as the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting its gold upon the city below. The river shimmered, the bells rang again, the people cheered. Louder now, their voices rising like a song. That night, the city glowed with torchlight. The Thames reflected the soft fire of 1,000 lanterns. Music drifted on the air, gentle, sweet, as if the city itself sang Elizabeth's name. But in the quiet of her chamber, far from the noise, Elizabeth knelt in prayer. She thanked God for his mercy, for his guidance, for the strength she would need in the days ahead. And then she rose and stood at the window, looking out upon the sleeping city. Her kingdom, her charge. The stars shone above, silent witnesses to the dawn of a new reign. And the river, as always, flowed gently on, carrying the past away and bringing the future softly closer. Elizabeth's crown was new upon her brow, but already its weight was great. The kingdom she now ruled had known years of sorrow, of division, of fear, of change that came swiftly and left many hearts uncertain. But Elizabeth, with the patience learned in childhood, began her reign as she had lived her life, carefully, thoughtfully, with grace. The Queen's first days upon the throne were filled with choices. Who would stand beside her as advisors? Who would speak in her name, carry out her will? She chose with wisdom, men of learning, of experience, of steady hand. Among them was William Cecil, a man whose counsel would guide her through the storms to come. Elizabeth valued wisdom over flattery, truth over sweet words. Those who served her learned quickly that their queen prized honesty, patience, and skill. The court, too, felt the change. Where once the air had been heavy with suspicion, with fear of a careless word, there was now a new gentleness. Elizabeth's court was a place of music, of poetry, of learning. Soft voices debated matters of faith and law. Lutes and harps played sweet melodies in the great halls. The queen herself moved among her people with grace, listening, speaking with kindness, showing all that the days of harsh rule were past. Beyond the palace walls, the land began to breathe again. Elizabeth sent word that peace was her wish. She spoke of unity, of bringing together those divided by faith, by old wounds, by old wrongs. Her laws were made with care, firm enough to guide, gentle enough to heal. She sought a path between extremes, a way that would bind the nation together once more. In London, the people cheered as she passed. They lined the streets, lifting their voices in hope. They spoke of her learning, of her beauty, of the soft strength that shone in her eyes. They spoke of a queen who would listen, who would rule with both heart and mind. Elizabeth spent long hours in study. Her council met often, their voices low and thoughtful as they shaped the future of England. Maps were unrolled upon great tables, the lands of Europe marked with care, the seas traced with lines of trade and war. Letters arrived from kings and princes, their seals unbroken, until Elizabeth's own hand bade them be opened. The queen read them with care, answering with words both wise and measured. At night, when the palace grew quiet, Elizabeth walked alone in the gardens. The moonlight silvered the leaves, the soft air carried the scent of roses, of lavender, of thyme. She paused beside the fountain, listening to the gentle fall of water. The stars above seemed brighter now, as if to bless this new reign, this new hope. And the queen, standing in the cool night air, lifted her face to the heavens and prayed for wisdom, for strength, for peace. The early days of Elizabeth's rule were days of promise. There would be storms ahead, storms of war, of betrayal, of sorrow. But for now, the land rested. The queen watched over it with care, her heart full of quiet determination. And the river, as always, flowed on, carrying with it the hopes of a nation, the dreams of a queen. As Elizabeth's reign began to bloom, so too did the great question that would follow her through the years. Would England's young queen marry? Would she choose a king to stand beside her, to share the burden of the crown? Every corner of Europe offers came. Princes and kings, noblemen and ambassadors sent letters sealed with bright wax, written in words of hope and promise. They spoke of alliances, of wealth, of peace through union. They sent portraits, faces painted in careful detail, eyes that watched from across the sea. The Spanish court, the French, the Austrian, all dreamed of joining their fate with England's through Elizabeth's hand. Her counselors, too, pressed the matter gently. A husband, they said, would strengthen the throne. A husband would bring heirs to secure the future. A husband would ease the worries of those who doubted a woman's power to rule alone. But Elizabeth listened and smiled and answered with grace. She would consider, she said. She would weigh each offer with care. So the suitors waited. Waited as seasons turned, as years began to pass. Among those closest to her, one name was spoken in soft tones. Robert Dudley, tall, fair, with dark, thoughtful eyes. A friend of Elizabeth since childhood. He stood often at her side, his words kind, his loyalty true. The court watched them with curious eyes. Poets wrote of them in verses that spoke of hearts bound by secret ties. But Elizabeth, though she smiled at Dudley, though she cherished his friendship, kept her heart her own. The Queen understood what others did not. Marriage for her was not only a matter of love, it was a matter of England's safety, England's peace, England's future. Every choice carried weight. Every promise could bind not only her, but her kingdom. And so, with wisdom and patience, Elizabeth waited. The people too wondered. In towns and villages, they spoke of their queen's beauty, of her grace, of her gentle strength. They dreamed of seeing her wed, of seeing young princes and princesses born to secure England's tomorrow. But they loved her as she was, their queen, their good Queen Bess, their Gloriana and Elizabeth. In the quiet of her chamber, when the candles burned low, she thought deeply on these matters. She read letters by the soft light, the words of kings and princes seeking her hand. She studied the faces in the portraits sent to her, kind faces, noble faces, faces marked by care or pride or hope. And she prayed for guidance, for wisdom, for the strength to choose the path that would serve her people best. The question of marriage remained, a soft thread woven through the tapestry of her reign. A promise never quite made, a choice never quite taken. And Elizabeth, wise, patient, steadfast, kept her crown, her heart, and her kingdom as one. In the gardens at night, as the moon cast its silver light upon the roses, the queen walked alone. The soft air carried the scent of blooms, the quiet of peace. And the river, as always, flowed on, carrying with it the hopes of a queen, the dreams of a nation. As the years of Elizabeth's reign passed, the early days of hope gave way to darker times. For though the queen ruled with wisdom, though her court was a place of music and learning, beyond the palace walls, shadows gathered. Lots rose up like storms upon a calm sea. Some whispered of placing another upon the throne, one who might rule as others wished, one who might bind England to foreign kings, or bring back the old faith with fire and sword. Some spoke of Mary, Queen of Scots, a queen without a crown, who fled to England seeking safety, but whose name stirred the hearts of those who dreamed of change. Elizabeth faced these dangers with the same quiet strength that had carried her through childhood's trials. She listened to the warnings of her council. She read the letters of spies, their words filled with secrets and schemes. Walked among her people with calm grace, showing no fear, though danger lay hidden in many hearts. The court itself held dangers too, smiles that masked ambition, kind words that hid sharp plans. Elizabeth moved among them all with care, watching, weighing, choosing her words as a poet chooses verse. Her great palace of Whitehall, with its wide halls and bright windows, stood like an island of peace in a sea of worry. But even there, she knew the eyes of enemies might be watching. Beyond the sea, Philip of Spain plotted in secret. He sent ships to raid the English coast, spoke of armadas, of mighty fleets that would cross the waves and bring England to its knees. And still, Elizabeth stood firm. She strengthened her navy, small but swift. She placed men of skill in command, men who knew the winds, the tides, the ways of war upon the sea. She sent messages of peace where she could, but made ready for battle where she must. In the quiet of her chamber, Elizabeth prayed. She prayed not for victory alone, but for wisdom to choose the right path, for courage to face what must come, for peace to return to her troubled land. At night, the queen walked her gardens, the moonlight silver upon her gown. The air smelled of rosemary and rose of earth cooling beneath the stars. And she thought of the past, of the girl who once studied at Hatfield, of the princess who once feared the tower's stone walls, of the woman who now bore the weight of a crown. The plots and shadows that rose against her would test her strength, her heart, her wisdom. But Elizabeth, watchful, patient, steadfast, would meet them all with the quiet courage that had carried her through so much. And the river, as always, flowed on, carrying the secrets of the past, the hopes of the present, the dreams of days yet to come. The years passed, and the shadows that had long gathered upon the horizon began to take shape. Far across the waves, in the harbors of Spain, ships were made ready. Great galleons, tall and proud, their sails waiting to catch the wind. Cannons set in rows along their sides. Their holds filled with soldiers, with powder, with supplies for war. The Spanish Armada, a fleet like none England had ever seen, was coming. A storm of wood and sail and steel sent by King Philip to bring England to her knees, to end the reign of the Queen who had defied him, to return the land to the faith he called true. News came to Elizabeth in soft words spoken in council chambers, in letters written in careful cipher, in the quiet warnings of sailors and spies. The Queen listened. She did not tremble. She did not rush to rage or fear. She answered with calm, with thought, with steady heart. Her navy was small compared to Spain's mighty fleet. Her ships were swift and her captains bold. Men like Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and Lord Howard of Effingham. Men who knew the sea, who knew the winds, who knew the ways of battle upon the waves. Elizabeth placed her trust in them. In the harbors of England, ships were prepared. Sails were mended, cannons cleaned and loaded, supplies gathered. Men worked by torchlight, their faces lined with care but set with purpose. The ports echoed with the sound of hammer on wood, rope creaking, water lapping at the sides of waiting vessels. On land, too, the Queen made ready. The coasts were guarded. Beacons stood waiting to be lit at the first sight of sails upon the horizon. And still, Elizabeth ruled with grace. She walked among her people. She visited the camps where her soldiers waited. She spoke to them with gentle strength, her voice clear, her words chosen with care. At Tilbury, where her army gathered, Elizabeth rode out, dressed not in silk, but in armor. A simple breastplate over her gown, a white plume in her hair. She looked upon her men. Farmers, craftsmen, noblemen, all joined in purpose. And she spoke, her voice steady as the rivers flow. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too. Her words stirred the hearts of those who heard. The soldiers lifted their voices in cheer. They would stand for their queen, they would stand for their land, and the Armada came. Like a great storm, it swept up the channel. But England's small ships, swift and daring, harried it at every turn. They struck and withdrew, like the falcon upon the dove. The winds turned against Spain. Fire ships were sent among the anchored fleet, and the sea itself rose in fury. At last, broken and beaten, the Armada fled. Its proud galleons wrecked upon the coasts of distant lands, its sailors lost to hunger, to storm, to sorrow. Elizabeth's realm was safe. Her people lifted their hearts in thanks. And the Queen, gentle, wise, steadfast, gave the glory not to herself, but to God. That night, as the bells of London rang in joy, Elizabeth walked alone in her garden. The moon silvered the world. The soft air carried the scent of rain, of earth washed clean. And the river, as always, flowed on, carrying away the storm, carrying forward the dreams of peace. The storm had passed. The Armada, so mighty in promise, had fallen to ruin. And England, safe beneath the steady hand of its queen, began to bloom as it had never bloomed before. The days that followed became what poets would one day call the Golden Age, a time of peace, though always watchful, a time of learning, though never idle, a time of beauty, though born from hardship. Elizabeth's court was a place of wonder. In its great halls, the light of the sun streamed through tall windows, falling upon tapestries rich with color, upon polished floors where lords and ladies moved with grace. Music filled the air, soft lutes, bright viols, the gentle voices of choirs. Poets recited verses that spoke of love, of honor, of the Queen herself. Painters came from distant lands to capture her image, to paint her as she was, and as legend would remember her. Wise, beautiful, radiant, like the dawn. And beyond the court, the land itself thrived. Fields ripened with golden grain. Ships sailed from English ports to far places, bringing goods, bringing knowledge, bringing news of a wider world. The theaters of London grew crowded, as the words of a young poet named Shakespeare began to stir the hearts of all who heard them. Elizabeth walked among her people as no monarch had done before. She visited villages where children scattered petals before her horse's feet. She received the humble gifts of farmers, a basket of apples, a jug of fresh milk, a simple wreath of flowers. And she spoke with them, not as a queen upon a throne, but as a mother to her children. She ruled with a heart both strong and kind. She listened to her counsel, but made her own choice. She kept her kingdom safe, but never sought war. She valued peace, but never showed fear. And so, under her reign, England found its voice. In quiet moments, Elizabeth sat in her gardens beneath the wide sky. The air carried the scent of lavender and rose, of earth warm beneath the sun. She watched the play of light upon the river, the soft dance of swans upon its surface, listened to the songs of birds, to the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She dreamed, not of conquest, but of peace that would last beyond her time. The Golden Age was not without its trials. Storms rose, of faith, of politics, of plots in far courts. But always, the Queen met them with calm, with wisdom, with courage. Her strength was not that of sword or shield, but of mind, of heart, of steady purpose. And so the years passed, gentle as the river's flow. The Queen's hair turned silver. The lines upon her face deepened, not with sorrow, but with the weight of years well spent. Her eyes still shone with the light of a spirit unbroken. And the people, seeing her ride among them, seeing her stand in her great halls, seeing her walk beneath the stars, loved her all the more. Elizabeth's reign became legend in its own time, a story told in whispers and songs, in poems and paintings, in the hearts of her people. And the river, as always, flowed on, carrying the tale of a queen who gave her land its golden age. The golden days of Elizabeth's reign stretched on, but as all days must, they began at last to fade into twilight. The queen, who had once been young and bright as morning, now walked beneath the softer light of evening. Her hair, once the pale gold of sunlight, was silver now, like moonlight upon still water. Her face bore the lines of years. Years filled with duty, with care, with quiet victories. The court, too, had changed. Old friends had gone. Cecil, the wise counselor who had served her so long, now at rest. New faces filled the halls, but none as dear, none as trusted as those who had shared the early days. The music of the court was gentler now, its voices softer, as if in respect for the Queen's long journey. Elizabeth still rode through the countryside when she could, though more slowly. Now the people still gathered to see her pass, their cheers quieter now, touched with affection, with respect, with sorrow that their Gloriana had grown old. In the evenings, Elizabeth would sit in her chamber, where the fire burned low upon the hearth. She would look upon the portraits of those who had come before, her father Henry, her mother Anne, her sister Mary. She would think upon the years behind her, the choices made, the storms weathered, the peace kept. Her steps grew slower, but her mind remained sharp. She listened to the debates of her council, offering wisdom shaped by a lifetime upon the throne. She weighed matters of state with the same care as she had in her youth, but her heart grew weary. The weight of the crown, carried so long, pressed heavier upon her now. The land she had ruled so well remained strong. Ships sailed the seas. Its poets still sang of honor, of love, of the Queen who had given England its golden age. Its people still looked to her with love, with gratitude, with hope. But Elizabeth knew her time was drawing near its close. She spoke less of the future. She prayed more often in quiet corners, where the light of candles fell soft upon her worn hands. And she walked the gardens in the hush of dawn when the world was still, and only the birds and the river kept her company. The Queen, who had once stood before her soldiers in armor, who had faced kings and storms without fear, now faced the one storm no mortal escapes, the storm of time. And as always, she met it with dignity, with courage, with grace. Her courtiers watched her with tender care. They brought her news of the realm, gifts from distant lands, poems and songs to brighten her hours. But they saw, too, the deepening of the twilight. They saw the gentle fading of the light that had shone so long. Elizabeth gave thanks for the peace she had kept, for the land she had loved, for the people who had stood beside her, and the river, as always, flowed on, carrying the story of her reign toward its quiet close, carrying her dreams upon its endless tide. The long twilight of Elizabeth's reign grew gentler still as the Queen's strength slowly waned. The palace grew quieter. The great halls where once music rang and courtiers danced now echoed softly with the sound of careful steps, hushed voices, of the crackle of a fire left to burn low. Elizabeth spent her final days as she had lived so many before, with dignity, with grace, with thought for her people before herself. She moved through the chambers of Richmond Palace, pausing often at the windows, looking out upon the river that she had known all her life. The Thames, wide and steady, flowed beneath the pale sky, carrying the reflections of clouds, of trees bare of leaves, of the soft winter light. The Queen no longer spoke often. Her voice, once clear and bright, grew soft. She answered the gentle questions of those who served her with a nod. With a smile touched by sorrow, or with a word spoken so low, it was like a prayer. She refused to take to her bed. Day and night she remained upon her feet, or sat in her great chair, wrapped in cloaks against the chill of early spring. Her courtiers watched over her with quiet care, but she asked little. Elizabeth's mind, though weary, remained sharp to the end. She thought of the realm of the people she had loved, of the peace she hoped would last beyond her days. When asked of her successor, she spoke with quiet certainty, pointing toward the man she believed would best keep England safe. James, son of Mary, Queen of Scots. The nights grew longer, the dawns more pale. Elizabeth slept little. She would sit through the dark hours, her eyes upon the dying embers, upon the soft glow of the moon upon the river. Perhaps she dreamed of childhood days at Hatfield, of the tower's cold walls, of the coronation's bright banners, of the roar of the crowd at Tilbury. Perhaps she thought only of the peace of night. And then, in the early hours of a quiet morning, the Queen slipped gently from this world. No storm marked her passing, no great sound disturbed the stillness. Only the soft breath of the wind, the gentle murmur of the river, the silence of a nation's heart breaking. The courtiers who loved her knelt where they stood. They gave thanks for her long, noble reign, and mourned the loss of the woman who had been their light, their guide, their Gloriana. The bells of London rang, slow and low, their voices deep with sorrow. The people gathered in the streets, heads bowed, tears upon many faces. For though Elizabeth was gone, her spirit lingered, in the peace she had kept, in the land she had loved, in the hearts of those she had served so well. And the river, as always, flowed on, carrying the memory of a queen who gave all she had and more to her people, carrying her story softly into the endless sea of time. Elizabeth was gone, but her spirit lingered, woven into the very heart of England. Her reign, long and golden, became legend, even as it passed into memory. People spoke of her with love. Gloriana, good Queen Bess, the Virgin Queen, the queen who had given them peace, who had kept their shores safe, who had ruled with wisdom, with courage, with grace. In London's great halls, in quiet villages, in the ships that sailed the wide seas, her name was spoken with respect. Children learned of her in song and story, the queen who had stood against storms, who had walked among her people, who had held her crown not for herself, but for the good of all. The land she left behind bore the marks of her care. England stood strong, its people united by the memory of her gentle rule. The theaters still echoed with the words of poets she had inspired. The seas still carried the ships that bore the flag she had kept flying high. Her successor, James, took the throne she had kept safe for him. And though new days came, new kings ruled, new troubles rose and fell, Elizabeth's name remained bright. A symbol of what a ruler could be: thoughtful, patient, kind, unyielding when needed, merciful when she could be. Her tomb, beneath the stones of Westminster Abbey, became a place of quiet honor. There, beneath the arches of that ancient church, she rests, the queen who gave England its golden age. Visitors come, even now, to stand where she lies, to whisper thanks, to remember. And the river. The river she had known all her life flows on. It carries the memory of her days upon its endless tide. It sings softly of her story to all who pause and listen. In gardens where she once walked, roses bloom still. In libraries where she once read, the light falls softly upon the pages of books she treasured. In the hearts of those who love history, who love England, who love peace, Elizabeth's spirit lives on. Her legacy is not only of power, but of wisdom, not only of triumph, but of grace, not only of rule, but of care. so, the story of Elizabeth I, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the light of England's golden age, ends not with sorrow, but with gentle remembrance. A story carried by the river, by the wind, by the soft voice of time itself. A story that will never truly end.